بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين على أمور الدنيا والدين وأصلي وأسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope you guys are all doing well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all beneficial knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefit us with the knowledge that He teaches us. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So inshallah today we're going to learn about another principle which is mentioned by the scholars of Islam, a principle which will help us in a lot of different things, in a lot of different situations that we go through, that we find ourselves in on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or even on a yearly basis. Okay? And this qaida, this principle says and is called or goes by al-amal al-muta'addi afdalu min al-qasir. Right? There's different wordings for this principle. One of them is al-amal al-muta'addi afdalu min al-qasir. And what this means is that if you have two actions, right? If you have two actions, one of them, the benefit of that action is something that benefits not only the doer of that action, but people who aren't necessarily the ones who are doing that action, right? So you have an act of worship, an action which benefits the doer and it also benefits others, right? That is better, right? That is better than an action which only benefits the doer himself or herself. Al-amal al-muta'addi afdalu min al-qasir, min al-amal al-qasir, right? An action which benefits the doer and benefits other people, right? Meaning that action that doer performed, it benefits himself or herself and it also benefits other people. That is better than an action which only benefits the person or the individual themselves. So here he says, يُعْنَى بِالْمُتَعَدِّي. What al-muta'addi means? What al-muta'addi means? الَّذِي يَعُمُّ نَفْعُهُ صَاحِبَهُ وَغَيْرَهُ. Al-muta'addi. Right? Al-muta'addi means an action which has a benefit which benefits the doer and it also benefits other than the doer themselves. Right? So al-muta'addi, al-amal al-muta'addi, just like in Arabic we have al-fi'l al-qasid and al-fi'l al-muta'addi. Al-fi'l al-muta'addi in nahu, right? In Arabic, it's a fi'l which has a maf'ul bihi. وقد يتعدى لمفعول واحد أو مفعولين أو ثلاثة مفاعيل. Right? Sometimes the maf'ul can have, the fi'l can have one maf'ul, two maf'uls, or even three maf'uls, right? So in here, that's in nahu, and we also have al-fi'l which is qasir, which doesn't take a maf'ul bihi. Here it's saying an action which is performed, and the benefit of that action not only is benefited by the doer, but it's also benefited by other people. That's better than al-fi'l al-qasir, an action which is only benefited by the doer. That's what al-muta'addi means. Al-muta'addi means that the benefit of that action encompasses not only the doer, but other than the doer. ومن ثم قال الأستاذ أبو إسحاق وإمام الحرمين وأبوه رحمة الله على الجميع للقائم بفرض الكفاية مزية على فرض العين لأنه أسقط الحرج عن الأمة. So he says here, these scholars said that the one who does fard kifaya, right? Just to quickly review, fard kifaya, right? We have fard ayn and fard kifaya. Fard ayn is something which needs to be done by every single individual, such as salah, right? No one can pray on your behalf. You can't just call your friend and be like, you know what, Muhammad, cover my maghrib for me today. I'm a little tired, cover my isha today. No, it's fard ayn. You got to do it yourself, right? You got to do it yourself, fard ayn. And then you have fard kifaya, an obligation which, if performed by a group of the Muslims, right, there is no sin on the rest of the Muslims. It does fard kifaya. It's called a communal obligation, meaning this obligation needs to be completed and needs to be performed by the community at large, meaning someone in the community, a group of people in the community have to fulfill this obligation. If they do, there is no sin upon the entire community. But if nobody in the entire community fulfills this obligation, now everyone is sinful. So here the scholars said that the one who performs fard kifaya, there's something special There's something special for the person who performs, or there's a special virtue for the one who performs fard kifaya over the one who performs fard ayn. Right? Fard ayn is what you're obligated to perform, you yourself, right? And it can't be performed by someone else on your behalf. He says that they say that the one who performs fard kifaya, which is a communal obligation, right? There's a special virtue that applies to someone who performs a communal obligation, which is not found in someone who performs a personal obligation. And that is that person لأنه أسقط الحرج عن الأمة. When a person performs a communal obligation, they've removed, right, the chance of the rest of the ummah or the rest of the community being sinful, right? So for example, we have janazah. Janazah is fard kifaya, right? If someone passes away, a group of people in the community have to perform the ghusl on the dead person, and they have to pray on that person, and they have to bury that person, right? Every single person in that community doesn't have to come and perform the washing and perform the prayer and bury the individual. It's fard kifaya. It's a communal obligation, right? It's not fard ayn. The community at large needs to perform this action and needs to do it. So now, when you perform this fard kifaya, for example, if you come to Salatul Janazah or any other fard kifaya, you get rewarded for performing that, but there's a special virtue, there's something special that you get and that you're performing here, right? There's a special virtue to what you're doing that isn't found in fard ayn, which is the fact that now by you performing this, you've removed any chance of hardship or harm or sin on the rest of the community. Right, so that's what they're saying about, and that's the fard kifaya. Also, Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi said, "Talabul ilmi afdalu min salat al-nafila." Rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Shafi'i says, seeking knowledge, learning, studying, memorizing, that's better than praying a salat al-nafila, praying a voluntary prayer. Right, so sitting down and reading the Quran, or memorizing hadith, or studying a book, or listening to a lecture, seeking knowledge in all of its forms, learning Arabic, whatever it may be. Seeking knowledge, right, in any of its forms is better than getting up and praying 2 rak'ahs, a voluntary prayer. Not fard, right, but we're talking about voluntary prayer, nafila. Why? Why? Because of the concept which we just said, which is that an action which benefits not only the doer, but those around them, or those around her, or anyone else, is better than an action which only benefits the person themselves. So for example, if you look at seeking knowledge and praying a voluntary prayer, when you pray a voluntary prayer, who will gain the reward of that? Who will gain the reward? Will you gain it yourself? Will you and your friend Ahmed, who's at home, will he be rewarded for the fact, will he benefit from your 2 rak'ahs? Will your parents benefit from the 2 rak'ahs? Will your buddy, will they benefit from the 2 rak'ahs which you just prayed? Right? Of course not. Of course not, right? The 2 rak'ahs itself, right? It's a whole other thing if someone taught you how to pray and someone taught you how to pray and taught you whatnot. But we're talking about the actual 2 rak'ahs, right? You're the only one who benefits from that. But as for seeking knowledge, when you learn, right, ultimately, when you learn, you're able to pass that knowledge on. So when you do this act, when you perform this act of seeking knowledge, the benefit of this act will not only benefit you, but it will benefit other people around you. So that's why Imam Shafi'i says, "Talabul ilmi afdalu min salat al-nafila." Right? Seeking knowledge, a person sitting by themselves and studying and reviewing and reading and memorizing, that's better than them getting up and praying 2 rak'ahs nafila, two voluntary prayers. Why? Because ultimately, those 2 rak'ahs will only benefit you as an individual, you as a person. While your knowledge has a great chance, to benefit other people. You have a great opportunity with that knowledge to benefit other people and to teach other people in the future. وَالْعِلْمُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. So I have a question for you guys, especially those of you who have been here from the beginning, who've been following along. What is the greatest act of worship that a person can perform? What is the greatest physical act of worship that a person can perform in this dunya? What is the greatest physical act of worship that a person can perform in this dunya? That's a question for you guys. Someone said jihad. Someone said salah. Anybody else? Anybody know? The best physical act of worship a person can perform. So the best act, Hajj. Okay. So Hajj is better than salah. So jihad is better than salah. Or is salah better than Hajj and salah? Jihad fi sabilillah. Okay. So the greatest physical act of worship you can perform is as-salah. It's the second pillar of Islam, right? The shahada, right? The shahada, the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and uttering that belief, right? After that comes as-salah, worshiping, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a physical act of worship, right? Physical act of worship. As-salah is the greatest physical act of worship a person can perform, right? So now are we going to say, for example, if you're praying, let's say you're praying and you see someone who's blind, someone who is blind, or even you see a child who's getting close to one of the outlets or one of the sockets on the wall, and you see that they're getting close, and you're praying, but you see that they're very close to you, and either, like we said, either the blind person is going to trip, right, or you see this child who's getting close to the electrical socket, right? Are you now supposed to say that, well, the best act of worship is as-salah, so I'm not going to break this salah to go and stop this child from getting their fingers inside the electrical socket? What would you do? Would you help the child? Would you break your salah and go help the child? Or would you continue to pray because prayer is the greatest act of worship? Go and help? No, help the child. But we just said prayer is the greatest act of worship. So are you going to give precedence to something which is of less virtue to praying in that situation? What do you guys think? Help the child. There is a need. This is very good, Yusuf. Very good. So guys, ultimately this rule, so you help the child. So this rule is a general rule, guys. It doesn't apply to every single situation, right? And a lot of scholars came on and said, they when they spoke about this qaida, this principle, they said that this principle isn't absolute, right? But ultimately, it's all about the benefit that comes from the action that you're performing, right? If there's a greater benefit in the action that you're performing, right? Even if that action is qasid, right? At the time, it's still better, right? So for example, we have a salah. Salah is the greatest physical act of worship, which we said. But in this situation, right? You stopping that child from getting their fingers inside the electrical socket, there's a greater benefit behind you doing that in comparison to you just standing in your prayer, right? So ultimately, the rule goes back to the benefit in the situation that you're in, or in the circumstance that you find yourself, right? That dictates which action is better, whether it's the qasir, right, the action which only benefits yourself, or whether it's the muta'addi, the action which ultimately benefits other people. So it's all about this. It's situational. It's situational. For example, what's another example I can give you guys is that we have as-salah, right? You have as-salah and you have az-zakah, right? So if you look at the two, as-salah is the benefit of salah is just goes back to the person themselves, right? When you pray, you're the one who benefits from that prayer. But az-zakah, when you give out zakah, that zakah not only benefits you for performing that and doing that act, but also it benefits other people who receive the zakah, right? But that still is not going to lead us to say that action is better than as-salah, because salah, through authentic narrations, is proven to be the greatest act of worship, right? So it's not either or, right? It's situational. It's situational, and at the end of the day, these rulings or these principles, they come after and come below the nusus, the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, right? They're general principles that come below the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. So if we find a text, right, in the Quran that maybe goes against this principle, we stick with the text which is in the Quran or in the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and we look past or look over the principle in this situation. And if we find that the text does not go against this principle, then we use this principle and we stick with this principle as long as we can. But could you not say that? Yeah, but we're not talking about, we're just talking about the action itself, right? Because it could give a person more taqwa. A person could focus in their prayer. So a person could not be focused in their prayer, right? There's a lot of variables, but we're just talking about the outward action itself. You just doing it. Someone could give zakah, right? But give zakah and they hate the fact that they're giving it, right? So how is it going to benefit them, right? Yeah, it does benefit other people, right? But ultimately it's not benefiting them. But we're just speaking based on the outwardness of this action and this action as a whole without specifics of this and that. What if the person isn't sincere? What if the person is praying but they're not focusing their prayer? What if they don't have khushu'? Right, then this prayer is of not much value, right? But we're not getting into those the specifics of those things because that will ultimately not allow us to really use any of these principles or apply any of these principles. So ultimately, an action which benefits others, guys, is better than an action which is only beneficial to the person who does it, right? That's the general rule, but there are exceptions based on the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. We'll stop here for today. Anything that I said which is correct is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and anything that I said which is mistaken or an error is from myself and the shaitan. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا for participating. I hope you guys benefited, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.